And now we want to talk about Shirley's doll collection. Very famous, very well known to people all over the world, known and yet not known. I call it one of the long-lost collections, but hidden in plain sight, because in reality, the collection never left Shirley's hands. It stayed stored in her home in beautifully air-climatized environment, and so that is why all of the pieces have been preserved in such vibrant, bright colors. I want to tell you about the beginning of Shirley's doll collection, because Shirley was really a tomboy. She liked her slingshots, and she liked to ride her bicycle, and she liked to play card games, and she just liked to play around a lot. But the idea came that Shirley wanted a doll collection. Of course, she did have her own childhood dolls, and we'll talk about some of those as we show them, but here's what she said in her 1954 memoir book, and I'm going to read you a couple of paragraphs. Fans all around the world helped me build up my doll collection. They almost moved us out of the house, so we had to build a special room for them. The collection was just a happenstance. It began way back when I made Bright Eyes. I fell in love with the doll in the picture. I called it Pinky, so Winfield Sheenan gave it to me. After that, quite a few people in the studio began giving me dolls, and the Fox publicity department began talking about Shirley Temple's doll collection. Well, then the fans really became generous. Not only individuals, but delegations and clubs and doll makers in foreign countries sent dolls to me. Fox arranged to have the distributors of their film in every country send me dolls dressed in the national costumes. So my knowledge of dress in foreign countries grew. There is a group of American Indian and Alaskan dolls made of everything from dried apples to corn husks, which represent a score of tribes. Our housekeeper, Katie, gave me 3 beautiful German dolls dressed in national costume. There are 2 Irish character dolls. There are dolls from every province in France and Italy, and a Russian doll that is really a disguised tea cozy, and a miniature African warrior in full regalia, which Osa Johnson gave me. John McCormick sent me a wonderful tiny green Irish leprechaun, and Bill Robinson gave me 2 carved replicas of himself. One whistles Yankee Doodle, and the other Susie Q. There are many dolls from Lenci, the Italian doll maker. Then there are doll replicas of Princess Elizabeth of England and the Dione quintuplets, and replicas of Gainsborough, Blue Boy, and Reynolds' Age of Innocence, and Thomas Lawrence's Pinky. There's the old woman who lived in a shoe with all her children. There's my own pet favorite, Raggedy Ann, that I played with for years, who's been washed about 1 million times. And there's so many more that go on and on. And she wrote about this in her early memoir, and then she wrote about it again in her 1988 autobiography, Child Star, which has a lot more detail on some of the costumes and where they came from. And if you want to, there are dolls in this group we're showing you right now that are from the French firm of Renault, wonderful costume dolls. There are Lenci dolls galore, absolutely wonderful ones, from the little tiny miniature dolls, including the little rare golfer with his golf clubs, to the beautiful boudoir dolls with Pinky, who started it all, the boudoir doll in her pink dress. Shirley tells a story in Child Star about that film. She was in it with Jane Withers, and Jane Withers played the part of the rich girl, and Shirley was the poor little orphan girl, as was so commonly done in her film roles. And she had the frumpy little plain doll, and Jane had this beautiful Pinky doll that she describes in great detail in Child Star, with its tiers of ruffles and very fancy, beautiful hair. And at the end of the movie, the producer took the doll from Jane, who also loved it in real life, just like Shirley did, and gave it to Shirley, where it has resided all of these years. That began her love of Lenci dolls, and I personally think the Lenci company found out about it because they sent her many dolls. And if you look at all of the Lenci dolls in this group that we're showing you, they all seem to have, look at this, ringlet curls, blonde hair, and a little curl in the middle of their forehead, just like Shirley. Thought that was kind of interesting. She loved the googly-eyed Lencis, and you can see several of the examples here, and big whimsical characters. Shirley Temple also always loved the Asian dolls, and there are 2 dolls here that I think are kind of interesting. There is a doll in the back in a red silk jacket. that appears in the far corner of one of the films in the movie Stowaway. And she's also shown in a publicity shot holding this doll in the setting, in the Stowaway setting, so it was used for there. The doll is fascinating because the head is a Lenchi head, beautifully painted, absolutely exquisite. The body is composition. Now, how this was done, it was obviously done at the time, since we see the doll in the original movie with this body and this costume. So how or why it appeared with this composition body, we don't know, but a really stunning and rare doll, and wonderful to have it documented in the films. The unusual Kessner Asian doll that you see in the beginning has its wonderful original, very elaborate costume and headdress. And there is a picture, a publicity picture of Shirley Temple at the time of her trip to Hawaii in 1937, where she is shown with this doll. Now, we know that many, many people gave her gifts when she went to Hawaii. I mean, she was so celebrated. 20,000 people thronged the seaport to welcome her when she arrived, and she was a recipient of many gifts, of which you're going to see another one in just a moment. So it's likely that this was a gift to her at the time. However, the doll, made in 1914, would have been 25 years old at the time Shirley visited there. So likely it was owned by a Chinese Hawaiian family, and their giving it to Shirley was a gift of extreme honor on their part to be able to give it to her. There's a brown teddy bear in the background. This doll was Grumpy from the 1934 film Now and Forever. When Shirley is gifted to this by her father, who again, she's an orphan, or seems to have been an orphan, but then her father comes back and reclaims her, and she loves him and adores him, and he gives her a teddy bear. And when he leaves the room, she looks at the bear and says, "He doesn't know I'm too old for teddy bears." Nevertheless, she loves it. She's very happy, and she drops the teddy bear, and falling out of the back of the teddy bear is a stolen necklace, which sets off a whole series of calamities that follow. So very, very famous teddy bear that actually appeared in the film. On the far corner of the scene is another doll that is very curious in Shirley's collection because it seems so incongruous. It's a very, very rare Maggie Bessie Mehrabian cloth doll that was made by church ladies of the Mehrabian church at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And this one is in beautiful condition. Why Shirley has this, we don't know, and the family, in tracking all of their records, can find no particular indication of it either, except that her father's family had originally come from Pennsylvania, where some of the Mehrabian settlements were organized. So there is some kind of a possibility of a connection there, but the specific story, we just simply don't know. So these are examples of some of the dolls. Wonderful things about them is that they really are so beautifully preserved. They have been so cared for, and there are many early photographs of Shirley's doll rooms, ranging from the time of, say, 1933 or 34, when photographs were taken of her doll room, to right up to 1939. There was a doll room set up at the premiere of the Snow White premiere, and they showing all of the dolls that Shirley had at that time. And many of these dolls, most of them in fact, are visible in those photographs. So it gives a really clear path of documentation that they have always been in her care. Shirley Temple relates in her autobiographies that the Raggedy Ann doll was one of her first and favorite dolls throughout her entire childhood. And here in the middle section, we see a wonderful Raggedy Ann seated on the chair, which is the very doll she was speaking of, and in fact, the very chair in which she would play with her doll and have it seated. A wonderful treasure from Shirley Temple. I like to say that having any one of these items of Shirley in your possession is like holding history in your hand, and with the Raggedy Ann, that would definitely be the case. Eddie Elf is standing next to her. Eddie Elf is another one of the characters from the Johnny Gruelle stories. He appeared in the Raggedy Ann in the Deep, Deep Woods story. When he was issued, it only appeared for a very short time. Very, very rare doll to find, and this one extremely vibrant. But here's the exciting thing. Next to Eddie Elf, there are, I think, 8 or 9 Raggedy Ann books. These were gifted to Shirley in 1937 by Johnny Gruelle himself. And on the inside front cover of every one of them is an inscription from Johnny to Shirley. And I want to read you the one from Raggedy Ann in the Deep, Deep Woods, which was a beginning of Eddie Elf. To Shirley Temple, may your pathway through the deep, deep woods of life always be in sunshine and bordered with the cosmic flowers of love and friendship. Johnny Gruelle, Miami Beach, Florida, Christmas, 1937. Johnny Gruelle himself died just 2 weeks later, and Shirley never had a chance to thank him for this wonderful gift, but she treasured them all her life. Next to the Raggedy Ann books are two comic characters from Disney cartoons, and they are certainly treasured by Shirley. She had a very close connection with Disney. She loved her Mickey Mouse doll. She played with her entire life, and in the early photographs of her child room, you will see many Mickey Mouse figures on the shelves of her collection. On the upper shelf are some wonderful dolls that are really treasures, and just a variety, so you see the wonderful interest she had. A wonderful composition doll in fur coat and hat in the Shirley Temple mode, but not a Shirley Temple doll. Monica doll, the second one in, perhaps the first one I have ever seen with the all-cloth body, and this is definitely an all-original costume on this early example Monica doll, probably meant to try to represent Shirley in one of her later child, early teenage movies. Very, very great doll. Next to her, Jimmy. Okay, whenever a collector says to me, I will never buy a damaged doll, I say, how could you not have Jimmy in your collection? Jimmy was Shirley's favorite doll. She took him with her everywhere. There are so many photographs of her. Every trip she took, Jimmy went with her. Sadly, Jimmy was left outside overnight when they were visiting the Grand Canyon, and he woke up in the morning with a crack in his face because of it. It didn't stop her from loving him. Shirley Temple kept Jimmy close to her entire life. Loved the doll. Mischievous fellow next to Jimmy is Scoodles, the biggest example I have ever seen of Scoodles in just impeccable condition. And here's what I want to tell you. Do people have dolls, favorite dolls that kind of look like them or remind them of themselves? Because what does Scoodles have but a four-lock curl in the middle of his forehead and two wonderful dimples, two wonderful cheek dimples, and just this happy, sparkling personality that kind of reminds you a bit of Shirley as a little toddler. We have down at the bottom, there are two Shirley Temple dolls that are next to costumes that she actually wore in the films, and then Ideal would come along and make the costumes representing the one she wore in the film. And here we have two wonderful examples, the famous Scotty dress, which is everyone's particular favorite, and of course the duck dress, which is another favorite, and you see the duck bolero that Shirley wore, and then you see the duck dress costume doll that Ideal made for Shirley, and she kept this doll. We've shown this little monkey with it because in all of the publicity photographs of the time, this doll is shown, Shirley is shown holding this doll and holding that little toy monkey, which was a particular favorite. In point of fact, many, many costumes were made for Shirley Temple dolls, and some of them were custom costumes. The doll, if you look at the three tall dolls in the middle section, the doll on the left, you're going to say to yourself, I've never seen that costume before. Well, indeed you may not have, because it was sent to Shirley by a fan in Central America wearing a native folklore costume of the time. And an examination of the doll, and it's a very elaborate headdress, which was custom made for Shirley, meant that she kept this doll her entire life. And according to her children, this was one of her very favorite dolls. So a lot of connection for her, as much as anything, was with the fans and the people around the world who bestowed gifts on her. The little doll next to her is the second version of the famous dress from Stand Up and Cheer, the polka dot dress from Stand Up and Cheer, and the big doll in the middle, there she is, the first doll that came out that had the Stand Up and Cheer red polka dot dress, and just wonderful condition. How about Texas Ranger? 1936, this was not made for a movie. Many people think it was, but indeed in 1936, it was a Texas centennial, and they invited Shirley, the commission who were celebrating this, they invited Shirley to come and be like an honor person at their ceremonies. And in recognition of that, Ideal issued Shirley Temple doll in the Texas Ranger costume, and we're showing it here in two very, very rare sizes. If you look underneath them, you will see 4 small Shirley Temple dolls in quite unique costumes. And this is because the studio at Fox, when they would make a costume for Shirley for one of her movies, if there was indeed leftover fabric, they would, her dressmaker would costume a little miniature doll for her wearing the fabric of her costume. And this was just absolutely great because they were very, very distinctive. And the Raggedy Andy on that page are seen in many of the photographs of her childhood dolls. On the bottom shelf are 2 of her favorite dolls, designed by Dee Wees Cochran for F&B, very desirable. And flanking that, 2 Japanese dolls. Shirley Temple said she has many Ishimatsu dolls in her collection, the friendship dolls of the 1930s, and she often said that these were some of her favorite dolls, and in just a minute you're going to see one that will just, you will not believe it. It's the most incredible doll I've ever seen. On the far right, we see some more Shirley Temple dolls, and it may be curious to you that you would think that she would have a complete run of her own dolls. In actuality, she doesn't. She has some very rare costumes, she has some very unique costumes, but mostly I think she kept the Shirley Temple dolls that had special meaning to her because of an event or an occasion or the person who might have given it to her that she had a special connection to. The next shelf down, mystery dolls of the whole collection. These are Alexander dolls, a set of 8 that were gifted to Shirley, but we don't know by whom, and we don't know what the costumes are they represent. These are the original costumes that they were wearing at the time they were gifted to Shirley in the early 1930s, because we can see photographs of them in her childhood doll collection room. And we have researched and tried to find out, do they represent characters from her movie? Was the Alexander Company trying to get more of a license to make more of the dolls representing her films? We don't know. If anyone has any idea what they might represent, we would be happy to entertain all of the information you could give us. The doll itself is the Betty model by Alexander, and the costumes are quite fabulous. Down on the bottom shelf, you see 4 dolls. Now look at the pair of satin pajamas that are on the mannequin right next to them. Shirley wore those pajamas in the film, The Poor Little Rich Girl. And at the very beginning of the film, when she is sitting in a chair and she's looking at the 4 dolls and she's playing with these 4 dolls alternately, the dolls are obviously made one of a kind by an unknown person and costumed to fit their role in the movie. She is singing to them, "You're the only friends I've ever had," from the song "Oh My Goodness." And so it's such a treasure from that time, the early 1930s, to have these 4 dolls that have been perfectly preserved from their place in the movie. These are just some of the dolls, hundreds of dolls from the Shirley Temple collection that are just showing you a fragment of them. And now we want to show you one very special one. Shirley Temple had a very, very special love of Japanese dolls, having a large collection of them of various types, but perhaps the most outstanding one was a special gift to her during one of her trips to Hawaii. This was the only place her family felt they could ever truly escape, although in honesty they really never did, because every time they went to Hawaii on 3 different occasions, and each time they were met with throngs of admirers at the seaport. People thronged all over to see her. She was given special honors, and one occasion, her family stayed at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel all the time. They were told there was a surprise for them in their suite, and they opened the door, and to their astonishment, there stood this spectacular Japanese doll, a lady doll, perhaps representing a bride, perhaps representing Madame Butterfly, hard to know. It was just such a stunning piece of work. The legend is, 2 legends are held, and it's hard to know exactly which is true, and frankly it's probably a combination of the 2, because there were 2 accounts in various Hawaiian papers at the time. One said that this very aristocratic, prestigious Japanese couple had the doll commissioned and made for Shirley Temple and presented it to her. And the other one said that 10,000 Japanese school children each contributed the equivalent of a nickel to have this doll made and presented to her. They were in such admiration. whichever it is, the doll is absolutely stunning. The head is of carved wood with a traditional eggshell gopher finish and exquisite painting. Enamel eyes, they are so beautifully sculpted. The hair is inset into the wood in a wonderful coiffure and decorated with just outstanding pieces of artwork. And the costume is totally original and authentic, a very, very stunning Japanese doll that Shirley held in her home with great pride for her entire life. It was one of her very special treasures.